particular survey played a very important role in my life. It was first project in my working career. I used this data to get the first research grant from ERC. Then I published, based on this data, my first article in the Journal of Comparative Economics, and then this analysis was the basic analysis in my dissertation. And I'm glad to present speakers here. The founder of the Ukrainian Longitudinal Monitoring Survey, Professor Lehmann, who was my professor in NaUKMA economics here at Kiev School of Economics. He's currently a professor at the University of Bologna and also program leader on transition economics at ICID in Bonn. Then we have two people from Kyiv International Institute of Sociology who helped implement this important survey. It's Director General Vladimir Paniotto, a doctor of philosophy in applied statistics, a very well-known person in sociology and marketing in Ukraine. And I know that Ukrainian young people who want to learn sociology, they go to the National University of Kyiv Academy because of Vladimir Ilyich. So he's also a professor at NaUKMA. Victoria Zakhoza, one of the project managers of ULMS, and also, what is your current position? Deputy Director at the Kyiv International Institute of Sociology. And she is the project manager for the last round of ULMS, and we need to remember the first project manager, Irina Lizagubda and Natalia Harshenko, and then Victoria. And we have two people, Alexander Danzer, who is a professor at the Catholic University of Eichstätt, if I can remember. And he will talk more about use of the ULMS data. And then we have Benedikt Herrmann from the EU delegation to Ukraine, who has a very interesting mix of education in science and economics, did a lot of research, and he will talk about finances. So we have, each speaker has about 5 to 10 minutes to present their points, and then we will have an open discussion. And Hartmut will start.
Okay, thanks very much, Olga. Of course, it's a great pleasure to be in Kiev. So when I came the first time to Kiev, to NaUKMA, actually, ERC program at NaUKMA, there were no data that were easily available or that were good enough to really do analysis of the Ukrainian labor market or labor market in Ukraine. So since, of course, I knew of the existence of the Russian Longitudinal Monitoring Survey, I thought we should do something similar like the Russian Longitudinal Monitoring Survey. However, we might want to actually improve as far as the survey instrument is concerned. And so I basically proposed this. I was already program director at ICID then, so I proposed this to Klaus Zimmermann and also Jan Sveina, who was the director of the WDI at the University of Michigan, and some other people. And so we got for 2 years, 2003 and 2004, we got relatively easily the money together to start this survey. We were very lucky to have in Ukraine Vladimir Paniotto, basically the leading statistician or survey person in the Soviet Union, who has had also extensive Western training at the University of Michigan. And So this ensured, of course, that we would get data that were of high quality. Now, what we did, basically, we got all the people who did work on labor markets and transition together, Jan Svejna, Catherine Terrell, John Earl, Klara Sabeljanova, Jonathan Wadsworth, and others, to develop, and Olga Kupets, to essentially develop these survey instruments. So we spent quite a lot of time trying to perfect the survey instruments. Now let me talk very briefly about the ULMS. It's a household-based survey. It's statistically representative of the Ukrainian population, aged between 15 and 72. We only have 3 waves, and I will want to talk about this later. I mean, this has to do with the fact that it is very difficult to get money for data, and one of the purposes of this panel is to think about how to put the financing of such, as I think, important survey on a more continuous footing. Unlike the RLMS, we have actually a better labor market history, or a more complete labor market history of those who are in the panel, starting from December 1997 to the reference week in 2012. We have 2 questionnaires, a household questionnaire and an individual questionnaire. Okay, so let me skip this. This is pretty standard. What we do have additionally is that we have a much more detailed questionnaire on expenditure and income patterns of households in 2007, which allowed to calculate very rigorously a poverty line. Also, we have additional features, individual survey, which is not normal for labor force surveys necessarily. So we have questions on ethnicity of jobs and production. Very importantly, we have questions on risk attitudes, on time preferences of respondents, also questions on the Orange Revolution, and questions on female fertility behavior, which was just a one-shot supplement. In 2012, apart from these module on risk and time preferences, we also have a section on cognitive skills, and we have a section on non-cognitive skills. And we have the educational testing, serving tests for literacy and reading comprehension. So this was in connection with a World Bank, STEP project. Now here you see basically topics that have been written about using the ULMS. So Alexander Danzer will talk about why the ULMS is useful when one does research, so I don't want to belabor this too much. So that's basically my introductory, if you like, statement.
Yeah, thank you. And now we have the implementation part, Vladimir. Start just introduction. This is forward.
I would say that the project is very unique. We conduct about maybe 150 projects per year, but for all 25 years of our existence, we had only 1-2 very short panel projects. And the ULMS is the unique project. As far as I know, it's unique in Ukraine among all other companies also. The really projects started in 2003, but it included part of 1995-96. We succeeded to win the tender of World Bank and conducted the household surveys, but unfortunately this part, which was panel, was not very good because it didn't have the model for the tracing people. In 2003, the response rate was not very bad, well, good for this part. But as the Hartmut yet said, we had about from 3 to 4, about 400 households and 6-8 individuals. What we have to do to ensure high data quality? Practically, we do the same as in many other projects, but do it with much more efforts and much better quality. First of all, you need to have a tracing module and to receive much more information that you usually about not only the respondent but his environment to trace after several years. Then we had good sampling. We succeed to take part in 1.5-year project with Leslie Kish and Stephen Herringer, from the famous statisticians, and Michael Kasalapa from Moscow, and have some recommendation for the sampling in former Soviet Union. Then the good questionnaire pretest. Then we have about 500 of interviewers, but not all interviewers can do good work for such very complex questionnaire. So we have some selection. Then interviewers training. It's very, very important because from interviewers mainly depends the quality of the data. Then a response rate improving, that we can't do what it's possible to do because the time between different waves they're very long. And then fieldwork control, data control, logical and double entry, and at last external control at waiting. I will give, Victoria will say about last wave. It will be more understandable how we conduct this survey on last wave, and then they say a few words more general about this.
Thank you. First of all, I'm really pleased to see so many professionals having interest to our survey, even in 5 years after it was released. It's really very motivating for us. So I was involved in this study only at this most recent round conducted in 2012. And as you already heard, it was connected with another big project conducted by the World Bank. It's skills measurement. And even though this data from STEPS wasn't used in panel analysis, as far as I know, this combined module also influenced the efforts and data quality at the end. So I will try to tell about this most recent wave from the point of view of data quality assurance. First of all, interview length always influences data quality. And the first reason is that even not all of those 1,000 variables were relevant for every respondent. The respondent is his or her willingness to participate is always influenced by the thickness of the questionnaire he or she sees in interviewer's hands. It always happens when you work with paper and pencil instruments. So we have to be ready to that. And the second reason, the longer the instrument is, the more time is needed to thoroughly pilot it and train the field staff. So our pilot stage for this way was conducted in spring 2012. We engaged the most professional, the most skilled supervisors from our field team. And after the instrument was finalized after the piloting, we conducted 5 sessions of 6-day trainings. So every interviewer from more than 150 interviewers working on this study passed these 6 days of the training. We spent the whole day for sampling, just learning how to select the respondents and household. We read the questionnaire during 3 days, Q by Q, and explaining all the goals and possible situations with every question. We had a separate day for literacy assessment set because interviewers had to be trained to assess this module, to work with stopwatch and so on. And also we had a short field practice at the end of the training. Sample is very important for any study. And in this survey, we worked with 3 sub-samples. Again, 3 was some magic number for this study. Of course, the first one was ULMS panel. It lasted since 2003. We had mostly the same household participating since 2003. And the main task was to locate those households and to find them if they moved or separated. The second subsample was aimed at, to be added to the initial ULMS sample because of the attrition. And we had the task to engage 500 new households to this sample because we were losing the household who deceased or became ineligible. All these 3 subsamples had very different rules for implementation. And in this second subsample, we had very clear rules for interviewer. They worked within the same PSUs as the initial panel was constructed, but it was a subsample of those PSUs. And starting from the last panel address on the route, they had to recruit 5 new households. And here is the example how we tried to visualize this rule for the interviewer. So all of them had this picture in their manuals with descriptions of mistakes and rules. And the last subsample, I will just say a few words because it's not so relevant for ULMS, but it was within the same study and it mainly influenced the length of the field work. So STEP urban subsample was added with the aim to get to 2,400 complete literacy assessment sets in Ukraine. And since it was conducted among urban population only, correspondingly we worked within urban areas only. And this methodology was closer to one used by the majority of international projects now in Ukraine, because they are refusing from our traditional random walk approach. And prior to the field work, they we conduct actually mapping and listing. So we enumerate all the households situated at the PSU and then make the address sample. So there is much less space for interviewer to violate. This is our instruction for respondent selection within the household. Again, we tried to visualize it because it was quite difficult to understand it from just one explanation. Again, we had 3 rules. For ULMS, 2 subsamples. They were similar, but they differed for urban and rural population. In rural area, we implemented just regular ULMS survey, and within each household, we tried to interview every household member aged 15 to 72 with a kind of short version of individual interview, which was 76 pages only. And in urban area, first we had to select 1 respondent for STEP component, and they were selected not among all our ULMS eligible individuals, but among those 15 to 64 years, and the rest of adults from 15 to 72 were interviewed with the standard ULMS questionnaire. We estimate the fieldwork effectiveness by the number of completed interviews and by response rate. And in this survey, we achieved a very high response rate as for our current conditions. It was about 85% for panel component and almost 70% for new panel participants. Of course, in panel studies, the response rate is usually higher because the respondents already know what's this survey. And at the individual level, the response rate is traditionally much higher than at household, so our major problem is to engage household. Once we achieved the agreement from household, then it's much easier to recruit the individuals. So in all the components, it's much higher than 90%. Of course, our fieldwork faced some unexpected problems. It lasted 9 months instead of 4.5 as we planned initially, and we had both subjective and objective reasons. We had the elections during the field work, and then we had winter during the field work, and had some methodological problems like underestimated response rate, which was caused by this literacy assessment module, which was in Ukrainian only, so we couldn't predict the reaction of the respondents in mostly Russian-speaking regions. But then we conducted 2 stages of quality control. The first one, we called it internal, when we just physically check if the interview was conducted and if it was conducted in proper way. So 30% of households have been recontacted, half of them by repeated visit and half of them by phones. And only 4 individual questionnaires were removed from data file because they, as the control found out, they were filled in from the words of other household members. You remember that in ULMS we interview all adults in the household. So sometimes interviewers and household members, they have temptation, since all of them are paid, they have the temptation to collect those data with some little cheating. And the external control is a comparison of our data, of the major statistics with the available official data. We based on census data because we collect our sampling was based on census data in 2003, so there was very a very complicated waiting process, and I won't tell about it. I think that's all about past, and now a few words about future.
The more time from the last survey, the more difficulties. So long period, then we have the great mobility in Ukraine, and it will discussed on the conference. Then we have problem to compare the data because now we can't do survey in the big part of Donbass and in Crimea. No, in Donbass we may, but it's very difficult. In Crimea we do not conduct at all. Changes of names because of the communization process. In Kiev, say in 160 streets change the name, and it's all one country. And refusal of population from landline phones. It was 55 landline phones, 55% had it, now 23%, and sometimes in our tracing model we have only landline phones, so it will be more difficult to find them. Really, we can solve this problem, and we see different ways to solve it. One of it, the using of computer-assisted personal interview. We use it for some other surveys. It gives opportunity. The respondent don't see the length of questionnaire. Then we use GPS. This is the control, the map with the GPS map which we received from the fieldwork when we used KP. No need in double entry, logical control during fieldwork, and so on. But my last point, that in any case, to have the good quality of data, you need to conduct panel survey as often as possible, ideally every year. In that case, you are able to build a personal relation between researchers, interviewers, and respondent, and increase response rate and data quality. I yesterday called to Michael Kosalapov, who is my good friend during almost 40 years, and who fortunately is the head of RLMS. He is the main methodologist of RLMS, and he is the head of Demoscope. Time to time we discussed, every time when we have ULMS, we discussed with him some problems. And a lot of things that they can do, they send letters, they have send letters to the households, the invitation with birthday and so on, and they will have 26 waves in this year, and the interviewers know the respondents. They work more than 20 years, and the respondent, it's very difficult to respondent to refuse to take part when you know interviewer during 20 years. So it's main, would we have it more often, the quality would be better. Thank you.
May I ask just one question before moving to the use of the data about implementation and past challenges? How did you encourage individuals and households to spend from 20 minutes to hours to participate in the survey and provide honest answers?
Unfortunately, according to our experience, the main motivation is paying money. Of course, we want them to be interested in helping science or helping the ministry to build working places and so on, but this is our reality.
And we select interviewers which is easier to go to the household, because some household refuse So the selection of interviewers helped to find interviewers which, for him, you have more trust. And then the training of interviewers.
Okay, thank you. And Alexander, please tell about your experience of using these data in comparison, probably these the survey that you mentioned today for Tajikistan, GSOP, and many other surveys that you used in your career.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for having me here on this panel. I feel very happy to be here. Basically, when I started doing my PhD in the year 2006, one of the first things we did was to think about the questionnaire for the third wave in 2007, the household survey to which a little team also at DRW contributed under your main guidance, of course. But what was really nice for me was during the implementation of the third wave, I went to Ukraine and could really see how Kyiv is implementing the survey, the pretest, and so on. And these generated lots of trust from my side into the survey, because you could really see that everything mentioned here was not just on the paper, but there was really kind of a capacity built up to conduct such a complex survey. Okay, I want to talk a little bit more about the strengths and weaknesses of the ULMS, in my opinion, as a researcher who has written several papers on this. And the first thing is, it's first of all a very long survey, or the span of the survey is pretty long if you consider also the retrospective information. So we heard before that the labor market history goes back to the year 1997, but you could even go back further, because you know the location of the residents in the year 1986, so you can even use the ULMS for historical analysis. And we have done this in a paper on the long-term effects of the Chernobyl catastrophe, similar paper to yours. You have also written one on Chernobyl, because you know the location of the residents in the year of the accident, so you can really do research that basically spans 30 years. And that's quite exceptional, I think, especially if you take into account that the location of residents in the year 1986 was not really free to the people. So what's really very good is the extremely detailed labor market information. So many information that's missing from almost all other surveys I'm aware of, including the ULMS, the GSOP, other surveys I've started conducting myself in Tajikistan, the one you mentioned. Of course, the ULMS really stands out here. You have very good information about every or about many specific job relationships, so how employer and employee are linked, what are the ownership structures in the firms, what is the pay, what are wage arrears, a variety of standard and non-standard shocks to employment, like unemployment or spells of non-payment. So that's, I think, is very fascinating, and this helped to understand the transition on the labor market a lot. And I think this is important because the labor market behavior and the labor market developments in Ukraine and in many transition economies were so different from what Western researchers experienced in the US or in Western Europe. So that was very important and shed lots of light on things Western researchers weren't aware of. What I personally find really fascinating is the possibility to combine a complex individual survey with a complex household survey. So you cannot only compare individuals within the household, but you also have kind of macro household information. You know where the people are living, how they are living, whether they are renting a flat or owning a house. So you can combine these different things and come up with questions that go beyond the individual level or just beyond the simple household level. And we have used this in several papers. We have tried to investigate poverty measures, different poverty measures in combination with labor market shocks. I also have written a paper on how individual wage arrears affect household consumption and the capability of households to smooth consumption. So you can clearly see the link between these two levels of observation, individual worker and household. And I think that's really fascinating and pretty unique, because in many other studies you cannot so easily combine this in such a good manner. What also stands out, of course, are the number of innovative topic modules that are included at different waves of the ULMS. Hartmut Lehmann was mentioning Orange Revolution was on the slide, fertility module. There is pretty comprehensive health section, well-being, risk measures, all these kind of things. And what is very good is that many of these modules were, in a way, designed in a way to compare them to other international panel data sets. So many of these questions were taken from the German socioeconomic panel, partly adapted to Ukraine, but in a way that you could actually compare these two panels very easily. And something similar holds for the British panel or HILDA in Australia or other surveys. So ULMS in a way makes data in Ukraine comparable to a number of other countries. And I think this is very important because researchers really can do comparative studies, comparing Ukraine with Russia, with Germany, with Britain, and so on and so forth. I mentioned the good data quality. I think that's really a strength. I also mentioned that I visited some pre-tests myself and really got very confident as a researcher in the high quality of the data. And then something that's very, very specific maybe is also due to the demographic structure of Ukraine, you have a very good sample of the elderly population that partly has to do with attrition, partly do with the demographic situation. So you can really write very nice papers even on some subgroups, namely the people who are close to retirement or at retirement age. I personally have written a paper on retirement and pension policy in Ukraine. And that is easily possible because you have very large sample of elderly population. Of course, this has a backside, namely that there is a rather small sample of young people, and for some other groups, subsample analysis is very difficult. One of these small groups definitively is women at fertile age, so the fertility section is very difficult to analyze. It's only a one-shot module, and then, well, the number of births in the sample is pretty small, so it's very hard to get enough statistical power. And something similar happens for other subgroups, but for the elderly, I would say it's an ideal laboratory to play around with the data, really. Well, the other two weaknesses were mentioned already. One is the long wave spacing. Of course, it's a problem that the 4 waves, well, now including 2012, this is 10 years, but you only have 4 waves. It means there are lots of data holes in between. I think the survey does a very good job in filling these holes with retrospective information, but of course you can only do, or you can only fix this partially. It would of course be much better to have annual data on all variables, because retrospectively the data set is good on labor market issues, but very often other things, demographic conditions, marital status happen or change in between, and it's very difficult to fix everything and all these data holes with retrospective questions. And then the other point that's clearly linked to the long wave spacing is sample attrition. I wouldn't say that sample attrition is worse than in other surveys. I think actually that Kyiv does a very good job in finding people. However, nevertheless, if you have these long gaps between the waves, you lose people. And the final statement by Vladimir Paniotto, I think, is absolutely correct. If you had annual waves, it would be much easier to track the people, to build up a personal relationship, and attrition would go down substantially. So I think the ULMS, from a researcher's perspective, is really a great source of data. It allows doing very unique and answering unique research questions, but also comparative questions in comparison to other countries. It has some weaknesses, But I hope that these weaknesses can be overcome by finding more money to fund future waves. Thank you very much.
The question is how to get more money to put these on a long-term perspective, annual or biannual.
Thanks a lot. First of all, I should state whatever I'm saying here is not necessarily the official position of the European Commission. It's clear when the European Commission wouldn't have an official position on the ULMS, but it's just to clarify that I'm here kind of as a former researcher, also part of the so-called Joint Research Center within the European Commission. We would do research also on policy-relevant issues, and then in this context, obviously got acquainted with the ULMS. I have to confess that I was working, and I'm in the background, so to say, in the weekends, my free space time. I try to continue as much as I can to do something on this issue. So I'm in a 0.5% level. I'm also a consumer of the ULMS. And then, having said this, I can only agree to what has been said. It's a high-quality product. It's something rather unique. And it's worthwhile to think about how we get the funding right. Now you look at me, of course, European Commission, it means potentially always a lot of money. And I would love to be in a position to say, yes, we do that for sure, but they can't. Obviously, it's subject to calls for proposal and stuff. Now let me try to, with my own kind of lifetime experience as a researcher who was always between the two worlds of policy making and then academic research on the other side. So first of all, if I may, a call to the academic fathers of the survey to dare a little bit more of selling of this excellent product. I mean, you have interesting results. We have also, I mean, the work what Thomas Dohrmann is doing regarding pattern of trust in Ukraine. As far as I know, this has not been discussed, reported in Ukraine, but it's a topic where I'm absolutely sure that if it's well set, it will become, it's a nice topic for TV shows. This sounds now a little bit cheesy, but it is like that. I mean, you have to get the public on your side. It's a highly disputed topic here in Ukraine. Is there a difference between the western part, the eastern part? Is there anything in between the generations and stuff? And the ULMS is delivering exactly this kind of responses of high quality, so something you can really, but then, so it needs a little bit of selling. To get attention, because the attention anyhow is needed to find people which are potentially interested to fund it. Now, of course, the ULMS by its very nature should be something subject to national funding from the Ukrainian side. But, I mean, we have to face the realities of today and for the, I guess for the next 2-3 years, that national funding in the scale one would wish for is not possible. But let me nevertheless state the fact that I observe as an external policymaker a kind of a transition process within the policy machine of Ukraine. This sounds maybe a little bit like blah, 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 but what I'm referring to is indeed we have now in the ministries, we have a head is about to start in the next days, this public administration reform. I hope that some of you at least are aware of it. We would like to professionalize the ministries. 10 pilot ministry will go ahead, will open jobs for 1,000 really not pretty well paid new positions in the ministries. We're looking for people, everyone is looking for people with an excellent educational background, record of work, also analytical work. And this will automatically in the long term also apply to the field of social policies and labor policies. So please, I don't want to be kind of judgmental, because obviously as a diplomat, which I'm now, I'm not supposed to make any judgment of the work of the ministries by today, but I will like to stress that there's scope, there is for sure, there will be more professional interest from the side of the policymakers in the future in Ukraine to have this kind of data available. Now, but I'm talking all now about nice future 2-3 years time, and you are looking at me and say, well, fine, 2-3 years, but we need today. Yeah. And what I could think of, let me say, the first is, of course, trying to go back to on the German side. The German Ministry of Research and Education, I know, incidentally, is committed to increase funding for bilateral projects and significantly increase. It's not about, I mean, if I may say so, only recently they spotted, my goodness, we have a huge bilateral cooperation with the Russian Federation, but something very on a low level is Ukraine, and we want to change that. Ukraine is really kind of course, depending on the outcome of the election and whatever, but I think it will remain on the agenda of the Ministry of Research, and they are, so I would really call you, try to reach out to them. Personal contact is very important. You need a coffee meeting to explain the project is worthwhile. Maybe Thomas Domen can just take over, and you might get some support on their side. Secondly, of course, very important, Ukraine joined only recently, became an associate member of Horizon 2020, the research framework program of the European Union. And so Ukraine is now fully fledged, kind of entitled partner for any application. And if you are ready to reach out now beyond this German-Ukrainian bilateral cooperation to French, getting French, whatever, who other, you need, I think, 5 different members, five members from different states. So this is, one is Ukraine, one is Germany, so you would need 3 more participants getting involved, and you could apply for funding from Horizon 2020, and you would have a very good case, obviously with this rich and high quality data set, that this treasury of the past that you carry with you. I would really encourage to look for calls which go for social sciences. And then last but not least, also within the funding of Horizon 2020, there is something that's called 2 things. The one is called ERA chairs, another one is called ERC. But I think what we hear, the ERC program might be something interesting for you to consider. The ERC, you know, this is kind of a little Nobel Prize that the European Union is awarding, very prestigious research funding for individuals, which then get up to 2.5 million to run research for a period, I think, up to 5 years. I'm not so much in the details now anymore. So you have a rich research diaspora, and maybe one could find Ukrainian research at an American institution or Australian institution who, 2.5 million in Kiev at your own disposal. That is mainly, of course, to fund postdocs, then the service and so on. Seems to me, given that you have this treasury of the past, a pretty attractive offer. Of course, it needs also some generosity, I think, of the fathers of the survey to kind of get this involved as somebody else from outside. But this is definitely, that would then ensure highest quality funding of survey and research of it for the next 5 years. And now, having closed the box regarding possibilities for public funding, I would still like to call for searching for Ukrainian private funding. I don't want to come up with concrete names, but it is known that there are some people in Ukraine who earn quite some fortune and might have the inclination to fund something which kind of would be to their fame. And here I have to close the circle. So by selling better this product, there are now really salient questions. I read the title of the conference, Post-Transition Country. Forgive me, from my perspective, we are just now we are in the waterfall of transition. We are in the free fall. Not fall is not the right word. We are in an incredible transition just in Ukraine, which calls for a lot of research questions and also questions which are salient to the society. It needs the right people kind of to communicate it. But then I see also potential for private funding from Ukrainian side. I'm not sure whether this was now helpful and would match your expectations, but this was an attempt, at least with my son banging my head on the wall, to find some ideas how this excellent research tool can get some continuation in funding. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe you would like to react? At least your steps, different trends, how to collect this money, how to persuade private institutions to participate in such important projects.
I think one main point is also talking or addressing Volodymyr's criticism or comment, of course, it's much better to have an annual panel data survey. But the only two I know of are the GSUP. I mean, there are others, of course, but the ones that are similar to the ULMS are the GSUP and the RLMS. And both of those are sponsored entirely by national funds. Now, actually, I have tried to get together with Tom Kupets, like in 2010. Or before I say that, let me say the reason why we have these 4 waves is because apart from the 2 first waves, when Klaus Zimmermann and Jan Sveina and others contributed generously to the survey, in 2007 I had a large EU project where I could put 200,000 euros into the ULMS. And in 2012 we have this project with the World Bank, where Johannes Köttel and I applied at the World Bank for essentially funds. And then IZA basically gave a similar amount to the 2012 wave. Now, of course, I have tried, together with Thomas Domen, we have tried at the Ministry of Education and Research, and this failed. In Ukraine, we have tried, together with Tom Kupets, asking a very important foundation, I won't mention names, of course, and it was said it's a wonderful project, but we're not really interested in paying. I think it is really difficult to get funds just for data. So of course you have to package it into a general project, but even then, it's really quite difficult. Because of that, and that's why I'm saying this, because of that I wasn't that enthusiastic of going out and spending a lot of time. I already spend a lot of time on the ULMS, and I have to write papers, and that gives you promotions or upgrading of your salary, even in Italy now. So spending a lot of time on making propaganda for something that hasn't been that successful in terms of generating funds, admittedly was not my top priority. Let's put it that way.
Just a quick reply. So firstly, we talked about it during the coffee break. Really, things have changed over the last years. So first of all, I reported already, for instance, the German Ministry of Research and Education, they spotted kind of only recently, oh my goodness, that whatever is done for other countries, Ukraine is really low on the agenda, and we have to significantly increase here the bilateral collaboration. Obviously, I have not the slightest idea what will be the figures exactly, but I witnessed myself kind of here how they got keen to do more, and so I really. I mean, Thomas Dohm and other people can try it in Germany. On the Ukrainian side, also approaching all kind of foundations. Of course, it takes time, but also here, I mean, my feeling is maybe not all of the Ukrainian audience would agree, but my feeling is the worst is over in economic terms, and I see already I have already witnessed now in the last months the first signs of kind of philanthropy again coming up. Obviously, the sums for now not very big, but at least some people are again ready. Interesting, complete different players. I find it very interesting. This is business which sometimes you never heard about, and so there's, I think, also a little bit more of this other potential. Well, I see entirely the point. I mean, for you, it's indeed the priority now to get publications out, but maybe it's for the other stakeholders who are involved here. To start doing kind of the sales business. Sorry, but I mean, we know magnificent European economists which get loads of funding, and as a matter of fact, I mean, joined characteristic of them all is that they are fantastic sellers. So we have a little bit, I mean, and it's such a great, really, I don't want to sound now like I was the product manager of the ULMS, but it is really a fantastic database. It's a fantastic tool. It deserves the attention also from stakeholders we haven't thought about. So let's not be, let's try it. I mean, we can, maybe we have later on some conversation after this this workshop here. But yeah, one more on the ERC grants. I just realized while I was listening to Professor Lieber. Then of course, ERC grant holders can be of any nationality. And so it wouldn't need particularly an outstanding Ukrainian to come here. And whether you believe it or not, I can tell you from my own experience now for the last year I'm here, it's very difficult indeed to get Western, as people from Western Europe or Europe in general, from the US to come here. But once they're in Kiev, they don't leave anymore. It's an extremely attractive place. And of course, I mean, if I was a researcher, I have to say at Max Planck Institute or at one of the prestigious British or American universities, I have done already my kind of assistant professorship. I have my networks, and I would see the chance to get 2.5 million euros to pay surveys and research work in Kiev, or in a kind of, you know, this was just a little bit of my life story. I was once with a Harvard researcher in the east of Romania, obviously a provincial town. At the university, we were running lab experiments. And we were sitting in the evening, and he was saying, well, Jesus Christ, if I had the offer for more or less in terms of salary, I don't need Harvard salaries, but more or less, okay, I would come here to do research. And I said, why would you do that? I mean, you're just at Harvard. You can't. He said, look, Benedikt, at Harvard, I'm competing with 7,999 other faculties for 12,000 students. So on average, I get 1.2. If I was here, people would know I arrived from Harvard. Around 500 kilometers, I would get every talent I would like to wish to have in my laboratory. So, and this is really something that might be out of the box, but maybe worthwhile to consider. Combine Kiev with the ULMS and propagate this idea among promising researchers in the social sciences. And there's another factor which makes it interesting here in Kiev. I mean, it's, as a matter of fact, Kiev is a kind of, it's already sold in some part of Europe as the Silicon City. So it's the city with the highest number of certified IT programmers in Europe. At the moment, they do all kind of, so there's all kind of stuff on outsourcing, so not really kind of high-end, but there's also some high-end going on. And what I want to say is, I mean, this would also allow for some possibly completely innovative approaches to do the survey itself. Yeah. So getting out there and trying to come up with an innovative combination, this might, at the end of the day, wrap up into an interesting package which could get, could successfully apply for ERC funding. So I think I've been talking enough. Thanks.
I have a provocative question to Alexandra, researcher who used this data. If you were Ukrainian researcher abroad, a part of the research diaspora mentioned by Benedikt, would you contribute to the project financially?
Trying to get money.
That's the problem, trying to get money, right? Well, I think as a researcher, first of all, you have to find the money. Once you have the money, it's not difficult to spend it on something you like. Huh? But which options do you have as a researcher? You're probably good in writing proposals or applications. If you get funding, then that's big fun. But if you don't get funding, then this is pretty annoying. So I think what researchers can do and contribute is writing these kind of applications. What we are not so good in is talking to private foundations, getting money that's not really on the table, right? Responding to an open call, if there is a call for funding of bilateral financing of surveys, of course we will respond to that. But if you if you basically have to build up a connection, a reliable connection that gives money from the private sector or wherever, I think we are not very good at. I guess there are people who are much better at that than researchers, academics. And that's maybe also part of the explanation why this is very difficult for researchers who are not used to these kind of arrangements. Yeah.
No, let me just say one thing about the RLMS and the GSUB. I think they are essentially professionally managed. No? So at the DIW, you have a department that only does the GSUB. You have Kozalapov and also Polina Kozereva, who have for 20 years essentially managed the RLMS. For me, it was just an amateurish, nice thing to do. You know, basically, all I wanted was that people have access to data free of charge, and because if everybody has access, you have competition, and you get higher quality of research. I mean, that was the only point. I'm not willing myself, and this is again to address your criticism, I'm not willing myself to professionally manage the ULMS. I mean, so that's why you need a certain amount of money. I mean, like in the Russian case, $1 million a year. I mean, the Ukrainian ULMS costs a lot less. But again, if you have an outfit that manages it professionally, of course the sums will be much larger. No? So, you want to respond?
Do you want to react, or we collect questions? So the floor is open to the questions. So please introduce yourself and then the question.
Olga Ivashchenko, Institute of Sociology, National Academy of Science, Ukraine. First of all, welcome to ULMS coming out in Ukraine. 4 waves, no one article published in our academic literature. No one. I assume that people from Ukraine involved in this project are more oriented to be published abroad. It's understandable due to their career reasons. So I would like to ask you to find also money to organize, I don't know, it's about monography, but maybe a brochure on materials or, about Ukraine and all these 4 waves. It would be very, very helpful. Still, we are working here as sociologists and labor economists, and I'm working more than 20 years. I have never found any sign of your project in our literature. Only thanks to Professor Paniotto, occasionally some years ago, he told me about this project, and I was actually, thanks to Amazon, I bought monograph, but only with comparison with Russia. So it would be very, very helpful for us, for people who are researching and working on labor problems here in Ukraine, if you will take to consideration this question. Concerning some methodological question, because from Talavera sessions, he readdressed to this session. Actually, this genre is another, so I will keep my question tomorrow for your session.
No, I just want to say, I mean, or you want to say?
Yeah, maybe I will tell. At least to defend dissertation, I needed to have articles published in Ukrainian work journals. GC paper was under the question, so I published, I don't remember, demography and social economics and some other. So at least my article on determinants of unemployment duration was published. And I think Clara Stabriano and Yuri Gorodnichenko, they translated something, but it is mainly in economics, not in sociology. And other questions from the audience? Or you would like to answer?
I mean, we do have the point is you do have, of course, the survey instruments are in Ukrainian, Russian, and English, no? And also some accompanying technical help or text that helps researchers is also in Ukrainian, or not? I think so, no? So I think if, you know, and again, it's available worldwide, but of course it's also available in Ukraine. You can download the data without any, you know, without any problems, and essentially you know, it's in the SPSS, and all the text files are in Ukrainian and Russian. So, you know, so I don't see what else we have to do. I mean, of course, we can have a propaganda brochure that says, "Oh, this is great," and we can list all the articles about Ukraine that have been written in English, and the articles that lots of people have actually written in economics in Ukrainian and Russian, I think, no? I mean, in Vaprosy Ekonomiki, there are some articles, for example, that clearly deal with a comparison of Ukraine and Russia and so on, using the ULMS and using the RLMS. You know, but I see the point that maybe Vladimir can write a brochure for which we try to find some finance to make better propaganda for this.
Natalia Levchuk, Institute of Demography and Social Studies. Also, it was already mentioned that ULMS data is comparable with other countries' data sets. I just want to clarify, maybe I have a question for Dr. Paniotto. My question is about Russian longitudinal monitoring survey and ULMS. Are there any substantial differences between these data sets, or they are absolutely identical? And if so, what these differences are, in your opinion, that should be taken into account in terms of, I don't know, sample, or for instance, I'm wondering about response rate and so on. So could we use both data sets to do cross-country analysis?
I can say only about comparability in methodology, because it's, the sense of the questions is maybe Hartmut know better. I know that there is the questionnaire RLMS includes more questions about health and so on. In the questionnaire, it seems to me the big differences. In Ukrainian, more part of labor than in RLMS. As for methodology, it's comparable. The data of RLMS from one point of view, they have the good quality, and from one point of view, they are better because they are able to build the relations with the interviewers. From other point of view, it's not possible to do for Russia so good survey as for Ukraine, because it's difficult to do, and sometimes they have to use helicopters, saying, to reach some places, or to exclude this part from the sample. It seems to me that they start to do it, but after several helicopters trips, they refused to do in this part. So from methodological point of view, it's possible to use both. And for comparability of questionnaire, I don't know, maybe you know.
Well, I mean, as I said before, I think, and also as Alexander Danzer said, there's very detailed labor market information. And one of the things that the RLMS does not have, but the ULMS does have, is that you really can reconstruct the labor market history of every person. I mean, any month where people change status, you can follow through in the case of the Ukrainian survey. You cannot in the case of the Russian survey. You only basically jump from reference week to reference week. Then there are the module on risk attitudes we introduced once in the RLMS. Actually, I did a project with Kozolapov and Polina and Vladimir Gimpelson where we added this risk module, but this was only done once. While in the ULMS, since 2007, again, it's only twice, but at least you have a panel on this. So in a way, we're spearheading in certain ways because the non-cognitive skills that we had in 2012, we basically allowed the RLMS people to introduce that module or that set of questions in the RLMS. And this has only been done for the first time in 2018 and so on. So I think the RLMS, as Volodymyr said, has much more on health than has the ULMS, but the ULMS has more on well-being, on attitudes of people towards politics than I think than the RLMS. But the main point is that the labor market part is much stronger. But of course, that doesn't mean that you cannot compare. Because of course in the ULMS you have reference week data and in the RLMS you have reference week data. So only that you cannot, I mean, people have done this. They have done hazard rate analysis using the RLMS, but this is actually not quite right. While with the ULMS, Olga has done a paper, the JCE paper on unemployment, outflows from unemployment, where you really can do this because you do have this complete history of people. But as far as the labor market is concerned, they're certainly comparable. I mean, you can use it doing comparative analysis for sure. But the ULMS is much richer than the RLMS.
And I also would like to add that it is 15 years then we developed the first draft of the questionnaire. And I remember that many questions, they are copied and adapted to the Ukrainian case. And then basic variables are exactly the same. Clara Sobiriano and Yuri Gornichenko, they did the paper on returns to education comparative study in Ukraine and Russia. So the basic set of variables is exactly the same, and you can compare two countries. Questions? More questions?
Logistical question. I'm Yuri Savelyev, University of Kiev. I got data first 3 waves, I remember, in 2011, and it was quite elaborated procedure. I actually had to write a request for data and got it via Tom Kupets. So now I understand it's freely available. I can download and use with students, etc.
Yes. Well, the idea is that you have to, I mean, basically the data, since it was an IZA project, you know, Bonn, IZA, right? The Institute for Study of Labor, where Klaus Zimmermann was director for a long time. Now he's no longer there, but essentially anybody who writes to the data center of IZA asking for data through 2012 now, you know, you just have to, essentially people don't want that you do commercial research with this, you know, so if Volkswagen wants to figure out, you know, how many diesel cars Ukraine want to buy, that's ICID will not give Volkswagen essentially the data. But if you have an academic research project or your students, the data will be, it's not that you can download them from the web, but they will be sent to you in SPSS and Stata format. Yeah?
No, in fact, they sent the link to the data I applied for the last wave, and we used these students, we assessed risks, attitudes, and so you just can really write to the data center and they will provide you the link, and then you can download. I asked for the last round, but I had access to all rounds. Instruments, variables, everything is there. Any questions? No, then we will finish this day. If you want to see Professor Lehmann or me presenting tomorrow, please come to the second session at 9, or the other interesting section on happiness also will start at 9. So see you tomorrow, I hope. Have a good day, evening. And you are all